Hello and welcome to Communication Connection. I'm Terry Likes. This is part of the Department of Communication as our focus of this episode. And part of communication is the ability to tell an effective story. And our guest today certainly is a master at that. Josh Foreman is an instructor too within the Department of Communication, Media and Theater. Josh, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you've been on the show before to talk about the fact that you wear many hats with the university. You are the faculty advisor for the Reflector. You've also been one to oversee our storytelling festival called Story State. But today we're going to have a different focus. You are heavily involved in book publishing and a series called the Hidden History series with a longtime colleague of yours from Jackson. Tell us how you began this Hidden History book series.
Well, Ryan Starrett is my oldest and best friend, and I write my books with him, and he lives down in Jackson. We started, I did an MFA in nonfiction writing at University of New Hampshire, and he worked in Texas and did a history degree out in Texas. And so when we finally both came back to Mississippi, we both were interested in writing nonfiction, more historical stories. So we just decided let's write about our hometown. Not that many books have been written about Jackson, Mississippi, so we pitched a book to the History Press, and they accepted our proposal, and we started with Jackson, and then we've been doing other areas in and around Mississippi ever since.
Well, let's look at the latest version first. We think of Vicksburg, we often think of Civil War history. Now you have in your 6th edition, the Hidden History of Vicksburg, and a particular story maybe share with us the gamblers, the Vicksburg gamblers.
Yeah, so even now Vicksburg is associated with gambling, and it goes back a long time to the early 1800s. So Vicksburg was actually not a city until the 1820s, and by the 1830s it was a real boom town where a lot of the cotton that was being grown in Mississippi was making its way through Vicksburg and then down the Mississippi River. So there was a lot of money to be made in Vicksburg, and there were a lot of people coming from all over the place to live in Vicksburg. Nobody was from Vicksburg because there was no Vicksburg. So everyone was a kind of a transplant. You had a lot of traffic up and down the river. And so gamblers began to kind of make Vicksburg one of their home bases, and they would be very unscrupulous and cheat these people who were flush with cotton money, and they got to be a nuisance in the city. So 1835, there's this huge 4th of July barbecue, which was this beloved American tradition even back then. And one of these they called them professional gamblers, he really acted like a jerk at the barbecue and assaulted someone and got drunk and offended the militia and everything else. So the town ended up tarring and feathering him. And then all of his buddies got irate, and there was a lot of verbal back and forth, and the city demanded that they all leave town, all the professional gamblers. Well, some of them stayed, and a mob ended up pulling them out of their gambling house and taking them to the town square and hanging them in the town square, where they were left hanging for a day. And it's a story about mob violence, but it's also a story about media spin. Even in the 1830s, you had all of the newspapers in Vicksburg who wrote about it and kind of painted it as, this was the swift application of justice, and the town had to do this. We're upstanding people, and we had to cut this part of our town away. But you had a lot of newspapers outside of Vicksburg that recognized it as a lynching. This was mob violence. If you have this happening, then you're going to have the collapse of your whole civilization. You just can't have people going and executing, groups of people. So it was a very, very famous national story. And Abraham Lincoln, just within a couple of years of it happening, ended up giving a speech and talking about Vicksburg and how this is a threat to our society. And so it was a big story that was associated with Vicksburg back then.
And thus the name Hidden History this series that you have, because I think we can all pick up on things that we never knew about. I was even, in my own storytelling, doing a recreation of Johnny Cash's events here in Starkville from many years ago, and people around the state had never heard that story, much less on a national scale. So you're unveiling some stories here. Let's bring it close to your hometown. One of the books in this series, The Hidden History of Jackson. Is there a story there you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, so that was a fun book because that is where I'm from. And Jackson, around that same time that Vicksburg was being created, Jackson was being created. And it was Choctaw Indian land until the early 1800s. And there was a guy named Louis LaFleur who was, I love how there are so many cultures that have gone into making Mississippi, but he was a French man, and he was from Mobile, and he was a Indian trader, so he was very comfortable with the Choctaw, spoke the Choctaw language, probably dressed like a Choctaw, and traveled from Mobile up the Pearl River to where Jackson is now. And he created a stand there. So basically in those really early frontier days, if you were traveling through the frontier, the only place where you could get food and maybe a roof over your head was one of these stands. So it's kind of like a hostel, bed and breakfast. So he operated a stand there at the Pearl River. And when Thomas Hines was looking for a place for Mississippi's capital, Louis LaFleur had his stand there, and so they said, this is a pretty good spot for a city. So they literally laid out the city around this French Indian trader's stand.
Now, there's certainly a flavor of gumbo and crawfish here in Mississippi, but you ventured outside the state's boundaries with The Hidden History of New Orleans. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so New Orleans was one of my favorite books. It was kind of a big step up to that big American city, and there's so many stories in New Orleans that we were able to pick from. But I think one story that kind of shocked and amazed me was the story of the 1929 streetcar workers' strike. Had never heard about this, but basically New Orleans was so reliant on the electric streetcar network. Their network carried about 150 million passengers a year in 1929. So it was literally how everybody got around. And because the system was so fixed, the workers, if they went on strike, they could shut the whole thing down and paralyze the city. And that's what they did in 1929. And back then, when a company's workers went on strike, they would bring in these strike breakers from all over the country. So they brought in this literally army of, I think it was 800 strike breakers into New Orleans. And when the strike breakers and the striking workers met, it was a battle, literally. Gunshots, fighting, bricks being thrown. And this strike lasted for several months, and the strikers ended up resorting to literally terrorism as a strike tactic. They started planting IEDs along the streetcar tracks to blow up these streetcars as they were traveling through New Orleans. So rather than allow these streetcars to actually run, they planted over 60 dynamite bombs and blew up cars more than 60 times in that era. And it's just shocking to me to imagine that happened in New Orleans, but it did.
Well, congratulations on more than 10,000 books sold now in this series. Certainly some compelling stories. You are a sixth-generation Mississippian. You now teach here at State, of course. You attended State. You also taught overseas in South Korea for over a decade. How have all of these experiences shaped your writing?
Well, I was always a reader when I was younger. And then I'm a comm graduate from Mississippi State, and I studied journalism, so I was writing back then. But while I was in Korea, I started to read long-form nonfiction, and I just decided I love these stories, and this is so fun. I'm going to learn how to do this. So that's why I decided to go into my MFA program at New Hampshire, and thankfully, being able to write these books has just allowed me to practice this long-form creative nonfiction storytelling, and it's been so much fun and so rewarding.
Since you've been teaching at State, you've branched out into more of a multimedia world that we are in. You oversee the Bulldog Online newsroom as a journalistic effort on campus, but now you're with your Hidden History series. You're branching into a YouTube series. Tell us about that.
Well, Ryan and I recognize that to reach an audience nowadays, you can't just publish books. So we actually produced 2 of our books into audiobooks that are on Audible that have done well. And we have a plan to create a video series based on our stories, travel around to these different places that we've written about. Like, for example, we wrote about how in Biloxi they withstood the Union siege during the Civil War by fishing for mullet. It's this lowly fish that's actually quite delicious, although most people would not know that. So we're going to go down to Biloxi and we're going to throw a net out into the water, and we're going to hopefully bring up some mullets and film it and talk about the history there. So that's our summer project, and I hope it goes well.
And that'll be the first episode in this series?
It will be one of the first. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
We have 12 planned out, so it's just a matter of going there and filming, and you know.
Great. I have to ask the question, with 3 young children, all of these teaching and journalistic and publishing endeavors, and a wife who works at the Sanderson Center on campus, the aquatics director, you're a busy guy. How do you fit all this in?
Yeah, I sometimes I am very busy, and I feel like I don't have enough time to do it all, but I love this job at Mississippi State because if I go do a project, like if I write a hidden history book or if I make a YouTube video, it's really appreciated here, and it's actually, I consider it part of my job is to produce work and to tell stories. And so it feels really good when my kind of passion projects align with my work. And also, you know, if I teach writing to students, I think it's important that I'm actually practicing writing so that I can advise them, you know, as a practitioner. So try to make everything work together.
Certainly winning awards, practicing what you teach, a lot of things going on for Josh Foreman, and we look forward to more in this Hidden History series as well as the YouTube series that will be coming out. So maybe that's one that we'll have you back on the next time. So.
That would be great.
All right. Well, Josh Foreman has been our guest, and we thank you so much for joining us here on Communication Connection, and we thank you for watching. We hope you'll join us next time. I'm Terry Likes. Thanks for watching.